On March 11, 2020, the world was engulfed by a wave of pandemics. The name coronavirus became a household name on the lips of many persons in different homes in different countries, and we can rightly say globally, hence the need to call it a global or a worldwide pandemic. COVID-19 was officially designated a pandemic by the World Health Organization. The Western world got to work with scientists working extra hard to provide a vaccine that will save lives. Africa became paralyzed and solely depended on the results from the Western world. 47 African countries joined the COVAX facility, a facility aimed at ensuring equitable access to safe and effective COVID-19 vaccines globally. Today, with the required funding, Africa can, through its assets, scientists, produce their own vaccines for Ebola and the likes, even COVID-19. This brings me joy to say that in West Africa, Nigerian scientists at the Usman Danfodio University, Sokoto, have developed a DNA vaccine candidate codenamed SJN3T COVAX and presented it for preclinical trials. Joining us to speak on this is Dr. Mustapha Umar Imam. Dr. Umar owns a PhD in molecular biotechnology and has worked extensively in the areas of nutrigenomics and not forgetting to epigenetics and bioinformatics. He has also worked on genomics of diabetes and cancer and has used gene-specific knockout animal models to study the transgenerational risk of diabetes. He has more than 70 peer-reviewed high-impact publications in leading journals in his area of expertise. And guess what? We would need an hour, yes, to read through his accomplishments. So let's get into it. Welcome to NC Exclusive, Doctor.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Let's start with a brief history of the Center for Advanced Medical Research and Training, otherwise known as COMRET, Usman Danfodio University, Sokoto. Tell us about it.
Okay, so the Center for Advanced Medical Research and Training, which is situated at the Teaching Hospital campus of the Usman Danfodio University in Sokoto, was first built in 2011. Now, the funding for the center came solely from the Tertiary Education Trust Fund of Nigeria, which is TED Fund. Now, after it was built in 2011, there was paucity of funds to start running the center. So the center couldn't start operating immediately until sometime in 2017, when TED Fund provided additional funding for equipment as well as other consumables and reagents to start activities at the center. So the center was officially commissioned in 2017 as the main biomedical research center for Usman Danfodio University at Sokoto. So what this means is that now the center serves more or less like a central laboratory for biomedical research in the university, where researchers and scientists from various related disciplines and departments will resort to if they want to carry out high-tech and state-of-the-art experiments that are usually seen in other advanced labs around the world. So again, like I said, this is majorly a central lab for the university. It serves the medical sciences, it serves biological sciences, agricultural sciences, microbiology, veterinary sciences, and the likes. Now, over the years, after it started operation in 2017, it has continued to enjoy massive amounts of funding from TED Fund to be able to carry out most of its research activities, to train students and to also train other researchers within the university as well as outside the university, and to be able to also do some of the wonderful research activities that we're currently carrying out, really, just like was stated earlier, related to diabetes research, related to infectious diseases like Lassa fever, COVID-19, related to snakebite venom, anti-venom development, and the likes.
Right. We'll get into it, especially with the funding as well. But COMRET recently developed the DNA vaccine candidate, the codename SJN3T COVAX for COVID-19, and was also working on a recombinant DNA vaccine for Lassa fever. What inspired these two projects and how was it funded?
Well, before I go into the specifics of how it was funded and the details regarding the project, I want to state that we're actually very proud of this accomplishment, because this is actually the first time that a DNA candidate vaccine is developed within the country. Now, prior to this, it was assumed that these type of achievements were only possible in advanced labs outside Nigeria, but now the importance of this candidate vaccine goes far beyond the actual vaccine itself. It's actually showing that, I mean, this is the symbolism is that we are able to actually develop vaccines against diseases that are actually affecting us in Nigeria and even in Africa. So now to talk about the funding for this particular project and how it started, especially as it relates to the COVID-19 vaccine. Now, after the COVID-19 pandemic hit Nigeria sometime in early 2020, now, there was a realization that the country did not actually put in place important public health measures to prevent the effect of some of these pandemics when they hit Nigeria. And so there were efforts at the level of the Federal Ministry of Health to quickly boost diagnostic capacity, therapeutic capacity for managing COVID-19. But then at the level of TETFund, they were, as an agency, they were actually thinking far beyond the immediate pandemic. What they wanted was to establish a consortium, that is a team of researchers from around the country that will be able to develop vaccines not only for COVID-19. Now, the consortium itself was actually not convened to work only on the COVID-19 vaccine, but to work in vaccine development in general. So the whole idea is, now that we have shown that we're able to produce a candidate vaccine for COVID-19, what it means is, in future, if there's any pandemic or epidemic within the country, this team will be called upon to actually work on developing a candidate vaccine very quickly, and then we should be able to deliver using the same protocols we have used to develop the DNA, the COVID DNA vaccine. Now, we're also working on the Lassa fever candidate vaccine, which we have just also recently developed. Now, the funding also comes from TETFund. Now, unlike the COVID-19 vaccine funding, which was given to the consortium, and there are about 6 members of the consortium, and then the funding that we received from TETFund was a total of 450 million naira to work on the COVID-19 vaccine. Now, the funding for the Lassa fever vaccine was given solely to Usman Danfodio University in Sokoto, and the center where this research is domiciled is Cambridge, that is the Center for Advanced Medical Research and training. Now, this funding for Lassa fever vaccine came through the National Research Fund intervention of TETFund, and that is a meager 40 million naira. Now, what we expect is that in future we're going to receive additional funding from TETFund to be able to expand on the Lassa fever vaccine candidate that we have been able to develop.
Very interesting. I mean, this is good to hear, I must say. Now, what are the key features and characteristics of the DNA vaccine candidate that make it a potential candidate for preclinical trials here in Nigeria?
Okay, so what we've done with our candidate vaccine is actually very simple. Now, you must have heard that there have been cases of vaccine failure with some of the vaccines for COVID-19 that have been developed in other parts of the world. And I want to believe the reason why this is so is because now most of these vaccines were hurriedly developed, and after a few of the strains of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is causing the COVID-19, were studied. Now, what we did differently was, now that we have information on most of the variants of the SARS-CoV-2, that is the organism that causes the virus that causes COVID-19, what we have done was to map the genome, that is the DNA of the different strains or variants of the virus, and to look at what are those regions on the DNA of the virus that are conserved, that are similar, so that when we develop the vaccine candidate that we have developed, will be able to not only target one or two of the variants of this virus, but virtually any of the viruses. So what you do when you develop a vaccine is to challenge the body of an individual that receives the vaccine to produce antibodies that when the causative organism or the pathogen for that particular disease enters the individual's body, now the antibodies that have been produced will be able to attack, because they've already been produced as a result of the previous vaccination, will now attack the invading pathogen and destroy or neutralize the pathogen. So what we have done, like I said, differently, is we have used a region on the DNA of the different strains of the SARS-CoV-2, which is the organism or the virus that causes COVID-19, to ensure that we have designed a vaccine that will be able to target every single strain of the virus that is known as at the time we developed this particular vaccine. So what we're expecting, I mean, it's still very early to say, but then our expectation is that the efficacy of our own COVID-19 will likely be superior to other COVID-19 vaccines that are out there available. And I said it's still very early to say, but this is our expectation.
I like that expectation. We like that drive as well. And that's exactly what is needed. But your research focuses on vaccines, COVID-19 and Lassa fever, snake anti-venom, brain cancer and diabetes as well. These are some of the aspects that you focus on. So I would like to ask practically, what are some of the feats, and outcomes that you have had over the past few years?
Okay, so before I go into the achievements that we've been able to get at our center, I want to state that everything that is the research activities that are ongoing at the center are not carried out by myself alone. Now we have a team of researchers with different backgrounds that and each person is contributing his expertise in, say, diabetes, for example, in cardiovascular disease, in cancer research, in COVID-19 research, in Lassa fever. Because now, to an ordinary person listening to this, he might think, now these fields are too diverse for one individual to be able to be an expert in. Yes, so how we're able to do this is we have assembled a team of researchers with different backgrounds, different expertise, and each person is contributing his own expertise to achieve a common goal. So now, in terms of what we've been able to achieve over the years, now our biggest development is that of the COVID-19 vaccine candidate, as well as the Lassa fever vaccine candidates. Now, we're very proud of these achievements because now these vaccines, especially the Lassa fever vaccine, now this is a vaccine that is likely going to be the first of its kind all over the world, because as it is presently, there is no known treatment for Lassa fever. Now, if we're able to produce, if our Lassa fever vaccine candidate goes through preclinical trials and goes through clinical trials, and it is deemed fit and effective for use in humans, what it means is this will likely be the first effective treatment for Lassa fever anywhere in the world. So we're really very proud of this. But then, in addition to this, I think the most important thing we've been able to show Nigerians and even the world is, unlike the thinking in the past that Nigerian scientists are unable to produce any meaningful products out of their research, now we're showing that this is actually possible to achieve within Nigeria, and in future, if any of such challenges are actually thrown at us as a group of researchers, we will be able to come up with similar products for any infectious disease or in any area of research. Now, in addition to these vaccine candidates we've been able to develop, we're actually working on certain compounds that have shown potential as treatments for colon cancer, as well as brain cancer, a particularly aggressive form of brain cancer. Now, we got these compounds from plants that are locally available here in the northwestern part of Nigeria. We're working with a group of pharmacists and pharmacologists that have studied some plant extracts. And as we all know, most of the drugs that are currently in use as pharmaceutical agents all over the world, majority of them, about 80% of these drugs, were developed from plants, from plant extracts. So we're just using the same system to sort of look at plants that are commonly available in the northwestern part of Nigeria to see what plants we could use as sources of pharmaceutical agents that will be able to cure colon cancer, as well as brain cancer and other types of cancers. The reason why we're particularly interested in this area of research in cancer is because most of the drugs that are currently in use for cancer chemotherapy are very toxic. Now, most times individuals that go through chemotherapy will have serious side effects that can sometimes affect their compliance to those those drugs. So we're trying to see if we will be able to develop newer alternatives that will have fewer side effects. And from what we've been able to achieve so far, we think there's a lot of potential for some of the compounds that we're working with to eventually be commercialized as treatments for colon cancer and brain cancer. Now, in addition to these, we also have been able to transform how postgraduate training is done and training of other researchers is done here in our university. Now, in the past, what used to happen is that most postgraduate students, and I believe this is what happens in most Nigerian universities, postgraduate students will have to sponsor their research projects. Now, we feel this is unfair to the students because whenever a student will have to sponsor his or her research, now the chances are that they might want to cut corners and not do research to the standard it is expected to reach. So now what we do differently is we give opportunities for for researchers that are unable to leave, to travel out of Nigeria to carry out cutting edge research. Now, like I mentioned earlier, our center is fully equipped with state-of-the-art equipment by TED Fund, and we're able to do research that is at par with our colleagues in any other country, any other standard lab around the world. So we provide opportunities for researchers, for students to actually conduct cutting-edge research in Nigeria.
All right. Okay, I was just about asking a question, but I think you just gave me the answer. I was about to ask if there's any difference between what is being done at Camret and what is being done in the Western world. But I mean, you just gave us that answer now that it's a global standard, exactly just as you've put it. But let's quickly wrap things up in this very interesting conversation. How do you get and sustain funding for your research projects in order to improve public health outcomes? How?
Well, most of our funding has come from TED Fund. In the last 3 years, we have received funding from TED Fund in the tune of about 750 million naira. Now, this may seem a lot by Nigerian standard, but then I can tell you that this is actually not a lot in terms of what other researchers in other countries get. I worked in Malaysia, for example, and at a point when I was in Malaysia, my lab had funding in excess of about $2 million. Now this was just one single funding, and of course we had funding from multiple sources. When I was I have worked also in China in a lab that had funding in excess of $5 million. And this was just a single funding that was received in one particular year from just one funding source. So yes, TED Fund has done a lot in terms of funding. We have enjoyed funding from TED Fund, as solely that is what keeps this center running. We've received, like I said, 750 million in the last 3 years, but I think the Nigerian government needs to do more. In addition to TED Fund, there needs to be other agencies that provide research funding to researchers like myself and other capable researchers within the country that are able and willing to carry out research projects that will be able to bring national development, to transform clinical practice, to transform different practices within the country.
Very interesting conversation. Well, let's wrap things up very quickly. Let's go back a bit to where we left the recombinant DNA vaccine for Lassa fever. Can you elaborate very briefly on this? Where are we and how soon are we expecting a breakthrough?
Okay. So we have just been able to develop a vaccine, a COVID-19 DNA vaccine candidate. And what we did is we looked at the DNA of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is the virus that causes COVID-19, to map the regions that are conserved between all the different strains, known strains of the COVID-19, to predict that this COVID vaccine candidate will likely be effective against all the different strains of SARS-CoV-2 virus that are presently in existence. So now a vaccine that has got to this level cannot just be used directly in humans, because there are ethical issues that will have to be addressed. You can't just begin to experiment in humans. Now, in the past, in the 30s and around the World War World War II, there were unethical clinical trials that were carried out on prisoners, on prisoners. And most of what we know today in terms of medication, in terms of clinical practice, actually has its roots in some of those experiments that were carried out around the time of the World War II. But then, because of the ethical issues surrounding how some of these medications or some of these clinical practice were developed, now there are a set of rules that will have to, any researcher will have to go through before his medication, her medication, and anything they're researching, any medication, any vaccine, any clinical device or any medical device will have to be used in clinical practice. Now, aside from experiments that you carry in a lab to see this particular candidate has a potential, now it has to go through what is known as a preclinical trial. A preclinical trial is trial in animals, because you don't want to subject humans to unnecessary stress, and at the end of the day, you find out that whatever you're trying to test doesn't really work. So it has to go preclinical trial, simply refers to testing your candidate in animals to see that, one, it is effective, and two, it is not toxic. Now, if it passes through, then it goes to clinical trials, where you test it in humans, and if you're able to have the same outcome in terms of toxicity and efficacy, that means it's not toxic and that it's effective, it's producing the same results that you expect to produce in terms of prevention of disease, in this case, and in the case of a vaccine, then you can begin to think of commercializing this as a product that can be used in humans in clinical or medical practice.
I want to use this medium to say thank you so much, Dr. Mustapha Umar Imam, for your medical research and breakthrough all the way from Sokoto. We do wish you well and look forward to a time where your names will be written in gold. And of course, we want to say thank you for making Africa proud.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. And that does it for NC Exclusive. What a way to say well done, the medical research team, and of course, all who have joined in ensuring that there is a breakthrough. My name is Joe Hansen. Thanks for watching NC Exclusive.